The 1958 FIFA World Cup in Sweden remains a watershed moment in the history of global sport. It was the stage for one of the most remarkable athletic breakthroughs in history, the ascension of a 17-year-old Pele. Yet, to view this tournament solely as the arrival of raw Brazilian genius is to overlook a monumental shift in the sport's tactical landscape. The 1958 tournament represented the definitive collision of two opposing forces: the mechanical geometry of European football and the improvisational, unstructured artistry of South America. In this crucible, Brazil's revolutionary 4-2-4 formation replaced chaotic individualism with a newly scientific approach to space and precision. This tactical shift redefined the physical and spatial demands of football, demonstrating that systematic innovation combined with teenage brilliance could elevate the game into a complex global chess match. The story of Brazil's 1958 triumph is not just a tale of the beautiful game. It is a historical case study in how a nation merged psychology, tactical geometry, and unprecedented individual brilliance to permanently alter the global sport. Chapter 1. Pre-tournament trauma and tactical chaos. To understand the magnitude of Brazil's triumph in 1958, one must first explore the psychological scars that plagued Brazilian football leading up to the tournament. Before they were universally revered, the Brazilian national team carried the heavy psychological burden of systemic failure on the world stage. For generations, Brazilian society had debated its own identity, and football served as the most visible canvas. The deepest trauma occurred at the 1950 World Cup held on home soil in Rio de Janeiro. Brazil needed only a draw against Uruguay in the final match at the Maracanã Stadium to secure their first world title. Instead, they suffered a devastating 2-1 defeat, an event etched into the national psyche as the Maracanazo. The shock reverberated for years, fostering an internal belief that while Brazilians possessed unmatched individual talent, they lacked the mental fortitude, organizational discipline, and tactical structure required to defeat European opposition in high-pressure environments. This anxiety was compounded by a clear structural identity crisis in global football. In the 1940s and 1950s, the tactical landscape was dominated by European giants utilizing the rigid and highly structured WM formation. Developed in the 1920s by Arsenal manager Herbert Chapman, the WM was so named because the tactical layout of the players resembled the letters W and M. It was a disciplined, systematic formation that relied on a 3-2-2-3 structure. It emphasized strict defensive coverage, specific halfbacks to mark the opposition's inside forwards, and deep defensive lines. The WM provided European teams with tactical security, predictable passing lanes, and structural superiority. When European teams pressed, they did so as a cohesive unit. Defenders were rarely drawn out of position, and the structure emphasized physicality, stamina, and systematic discipline over fluid, improvisational artistry. In stark contrast, South American football in general, and Brazilian football in particular, was defined by a different philosophy. Brazilian play was characterized by a disorganized, highly individualistic style. Players relied heavily on instinct, improvisation, and natural dribbling ability. This approach was deeply rooted in the cultural embrace of Ginga, a fluid, rhythmic style of movement influenced by Afro-Brazilian capoeira and samba. While this allowed players to easily beat their markers in one-on-one situations, it lacked the spatial awareness and defensive cover required to neutralize the heavily structured European systems. When Brazilian teams faced European opponents who were rigidly organized and physically imposing, they were often overwhelmed. The disorganized Brazilian approach left massive gaps in midfield and defense. This contrast set the stage for a desperate Brazil. To survive the physical and tactical demands of 1958, the Brazilian Football Confederation, CBD, knew they required a radical departure from their improvisational tradition. They needed an approach that could match the tactical rigor of the Europeans while allowing their natural creative flair to flourish. Chapter 2. The birth of the 4-2-4 and scientific preparation, realizing that structural disorganization would no longer suffice on the global stage. Brazilian football underwent a period of deep introspection and tactical experimentation following the disappointment of the 1954 World Cup in Switzerland. The evolution required to break the European monopoly began to take shape domestically and was formalized under the guidance of national team coach Vicente Fiola and his backroom staff. The most significant tactical change was the move to a four-man backline, creating the foundational blueprint for modern defensive coverage and overlapping fullback runs. Before this era, teams typically defended with three players, relying on the central defender to sweep behind the fullbacks. The Brazilian 4-2-4, pioneered at the club level in Brazil by teams like Santos and Palmeiras, revolutionized this approach. By utilizing two central defenders flanked by two dedicated fullbacks, the Brazilian team established the first modern defensive structure. Crucially, the 4-2-4 was not merely a defensive posture, it was highly offensive. The presence of a four-man defense allowed the team to release their fullbacks into the attack, creating the overlapping runs that would become a hallmark of Brazilian football. The backline maintained positional discipline, knowing they had adequate cover, while the two central midfielders, Zito and Didi, dictated the rhythm of the game and shielded the defense. However, this shift required a level of physical and mental discipline that Brazilian players were not traditionally known for. To turn these naturally gifted individuals into elite tactical assets, the Brazilian administration assembled a revolutionary backroom staff. Recognizing the psychological scars of Americanazzo, Coach Vicente Fiola brought a dedicated team psychologist, Professor João Carvalhais, into the fold. Carvalhais was tasked with assessing the mental resilience of the players, ensuring they could handle the immense pressure of the World Cup without panicking when faced with adversity. Additionally, Brazil recognized that physical performance was intrinsically linked to overall health, prompting the inclusion of a team dentist, Dr. Mario Trigo, on the staff. Dr. Trigo's inclusion stemmed from the observation that many players from humble, impoverished backgrounds suffered from untreated dental infections, which contributed to systemic fatigue, muscular injuries, and slow recovery times. By treating these dental issues, the staff ensured the athletes could maintain peak physical condition throughout the tournament. This unprecedented level of scientific preparation, encompassing physical conditioning, tactical innovation, psychological evaluation, and medical care, transformed the Brazilian squad. The shift from reliance on pure instinct to a structured tactical geometry prepared the canvas for a specific catalyst that would change the game forever. Chapter 3. The arrival of the 17-year-old phenom. Despite the sophisticated tactical framework put in place by Vicente Fiola, the Brazilian campaign required an explosive catalyst to unlock the rigid man-to-man marking systems employed by European defenses. That catalyst arrived in the form of a 17-year-old phenom from the city of Bauru, Edson Arantes do Nascimento, known to the world as Pele. Pele's entrance into the starting lineup did not happen at the beginning of the tournament. Brazil approached the early group stages with a degree of caution, and the teenage prodigy was initially sidelined due to a knee injury. However, a turning point occurred in the pivotal third group match against the Soviet Union. The Soviets were an organized, physically imposing team that relied on relentless stamina and structured defensive play. Recognizing that a draw was sufficient to advance, but desiring a dominant victory to make a statement, Fiola made bold changes to the starting 11. He inserted both Pele and the gifted, albeit unconventional, winger Garrincha into the lineup. The impact was immediate. Within the opening minutes of the match, the combination of Garrincha's unpredictable dribbling and Pele's aggressive forward runs dismantled the Soviet defensive block. Pele's specific movement patterns were tailor-made to exploit the tactical spaces created by the 4-2-4 formation. In previous eras, strikers remained highly static, primarily waiting for crosses or opportunities to shoot. Pele introduced a new dimension to the game, the withdrawn forward or shadow striker. He did not simply wait on the defensive line. he frequently dropped deep into midfield. This movement dragged central defenders out of their designated zones, creating chaotic gaps in the European defensive lines. When Pele dropped deep, he combined brilliantly with midfielders like Didi. As defenders followed him up the pitch, the space behind them widened, creating open channels that allowed wingers like Garrincha and Mario Zagallo to cut inside and attack the goal. However, Pele's true brilliance lay in his ability to read the game spatially. The tactical systems of the 1950s relied heavily on man-to-man marking, where defenders were assigned to stick closely to their opposing forwards across the pitch. This rigid system was highly vulnerable to intelligent movement. Pele's genius was that he understood not just how to move, but how to manipulate the positioning of his markers. He would draw defenders away from dangerous areas, create space for his teammates through clever decoy runs, and utilize sudden changes of pace to lose his marker. This level of spatial awareness was decades ahead of its time, effectively laying the groundwork for the modern number 10 role. The synergy between Garrincha's width and Pele's central gravity completely broke the man-to-man marking systems of the era. Because defenders were forced to respect Pele's goal-scoring threat and Garrincha's exceptional dribbling on the right flank, they could not maintain their rigid defensive lines. The result was a sophisticated, fluid attacking force that European teams had never encountered. The world quickly realized that this teenager was playing with a deep understanding of geometry and spacing, transforming football from a simple test of physical strength into a sophisticated game of tactical intellect. Chapter 4. Quarterfinals and the maturation of a legend with Pele and Garrincha firmly established in the starting lineup. The Brazilian tactical machine gained formidable momentum heading into the knockout stages. The quarterfinal match against Wales presented a stern test of the Brazilian 4-2-4 formation. The Welsh team, known for their physical resilience and disciplined defensive block, were determined to stifle the Brazilian attack. In this match, the strength of Brazil's collective tactical approach became clear. While much of the subsequent historical focus fell on Pele's individual brilliance, the victory over Wales highlighted the structural maturity of the team. The Brazilian 4-2-4 allowed the team to control possession in the midfield, utilizing Didi's vision to distribute the ball effectively across the pitch. When Wales attempted to press, the Brazilian defenders demonstrated the positional discipline that had been drilled into them by Fiola's coaching staff. It was in this tense quarterfinal encounter that Pele truly announced his arrival as a goalscorer on the global stage. In the 66th minute, with the match deadlocked at 0-0 and the Welsh defense holding firm, Pele produced a moment of individual brilliance that highlighted his spatial intelligence. Receiving a pass inside the penalty area with his back to the goal, he showcased exceptional close control. He flicked the ball over the head of his marker, creating separation in an instant, and quickly fired a precise volley into the back of the net. This goal was a defining moment of the tournament. It demonstrated Pele's ability to execute complex technical actions in tight spaces, a skill born of the creative freedom within the Brazilian system. More importantly, it broke the psychological barrier that had previously plagued Brazilian teams. In tight, competitive matches where previous generations might have succumbed to panic or frustration, the 1958 team maintained its tactical discipline and relied on its structure to create opportunities. The 1-0 victory over Wales propelled Brazil into the semi-finals, cementing the belief that their blend of tactical science and individual genius was an unstoppable combination. Chapter 5. The semi-final clash against France. The semi-final clash against France in Gothenburg represented a clash of two distinct football philosophies. The French team were one of the most formidable attacking units in the tournament, spearheaded by the prolific goalscorer Just Fontaine. France utilized a fluid, dynamic style of play that challenged the Brazilian defensive structure. This match became a fascinating tactical battle. The French system relied on quick transitions and aggressive attacking movements, aiming to bypass the Brazilian midfield and expose the central defenders. However, Fiola's 4-2-4 formation proved its worth in this encounter. The Brazilian midfield, anchored by Zito and orchestrated by Didi, worked to control the tempo of the game. By maintaining possession, Brazil limited the opportunities for the French attack to gain momentum. The match also highlighted Pele's growing maturity and his role as the fulcrum of the Brazilian attack. Rather than playing as a traditional center forward, Pele frequently dropped deeper into the midfield to receive the ball, serving as a playmaker. This movement disrupted the French defensive assignments. French defenders were forced to make a difficult choice: either follow Pele into the midfield and leave space behind them, or hold their defensive line and allow the teenager time and space to orchestrate the attack. Whenever defenders chose to hold their line, Pele capitalized by turning and driving at the French defense, utilizing his explosive pace and close control. The synergy between Pele, Garrincha, and left-winger Mario Zagallo created multiple attacking avenues. Zagallo's tactical intelligence on the left wing was particularly crucial. He provided attacking width, but also tracked back to support the midfield, offering defensive stability against French counterattacks. The semi-final culminated in a commanding 5-2 victory for Brazil, a result that sent shockwaves through the footballing world. The match was defined by Pele's remarkable performance, as he scored a spectacular second-half hat-trick. Each goal showcased a different facet of his tactical and technical superiority. His movement in the penalty area, anticipation of rebounds, and clinical finishing left the French defense bewildered. More importantly, the semi-final against France proved that Brazil's tactical revolution was capable of handling highly talented, free-flowing European opposition. The victory demonstrated the success of the 4-2-4 formation in creating overloads in the attacking third while maintaining defensive coverage. It also highlighted the mental resilience of the Brazilian squad, who overcame an early French equalizer to dominate the match systematically. Pele's performance in this semi-final cemented his status as a global phenomenon, while the team's cohesive play established them as the undisputed favorites for the final. Chapter 6. The Final. Geometry Meets Destiny. The culmination of the 1958 World Cup took place at the Rosunda Stadium in Solna, Stockholm. The final was a historic collision of two distinct football cultures. The hosts, Sweden, representing the organized and physical European style, and Brazil, representing their revolutionary synthesis of tactical science and South American artistry. The Swedish team reached the final through systematic discipline, physical strength, and a highly organized WM structure. They were spurred on by a passionate home crowd and managed by the astute English tactician George Rayner. Before the match, Rayner made a confident prediction. He argued that if the Brazilians went a goal behind, they would panic and their tactical structure would disintegrate. Initially, it appeared Rayner's prediction might come to fruition. In the opening minutes of the final, the Brazilian defense was caught off guard, and Swedish forward Nils Lidholm scored an early goal. For a brief moment, the ghosts of the Maracanazo threatened to re-emerge. In previous World Cups, falling behind early to a disciplined European side might have triggered chaotic, individualistic desperation, leading to the collapse of the team's structure. However, the 1958 Brazilian team was different. The psychological preparation instilled by Professor João Carvalhais, combined with the structural confidence provided by the 4-2-4 formation, enabled the team to maintain their composure. The veteran midfielder Didi took control of the situation. He calmly collected the ball from the back of the net, walked back to the halfway line, and reassured his teammates that their tactical superiority would prevail over the course of the 90 minutes. Brazil quickly returned to their tactical game plan, utilizing the width provided by Garrincha on the right flank and Zagallo on the left. Garrincha, utilizing his exceptional speed and unconventional dribbling, consistently beat his marker, Swedish left-back Sven Axbom, on the outside. He delivered a series of precise crosses into the penalty area, which allowed striker Vava to score two near-identical goals, turning the deficit into a 2-1 lead by halftime. In the second half, the final became the stage for Pele's masterclass in spatial awareness and technical execution. In the 55th minute, with Brazil leading and searching for a decisive third goal, Pele produced one of the most iconic moments in football history. Receiving a lofted pass inside the penalty area with his back to goal, he controlled the ball on his chest. Before the Swedish defender could react, Pele hooked the ball over the defender's head in a fluid motion, spun around him, and struck a powerful volley into the bottom corner of the net. This goal was a testament to Pele's supreme understanding of geometry and space. By executing a complex piece of skill in a heavily congested area, he bypassed a rigid European defensive line that relied on tight marking. The goal completely shifted the momentum of the final, demoralizing the Swedish defense and electrifying the stadium. As the Swedish team pressed forward in desperation to narrow the deficit, the Brazilian tactical structure provided the necessary defensive coverage. The back four held their positions, while Didi and Zito controlled the midfield, breaking up Swedish attacks and launching rapid counterattacks. The crowning moment of the match arrived in the closing minutes. With Sweden overcommitting to the attack, Brazil launched a counteroffensive. Pele, displaying remarkable aerial ability, leaped to meet a cross from Mario Zagallo, looping a precise header over the Swedish goalkeeper. The goal sparked emotional celebrations on the pitch. The final whistle confirmed a 5-2 victory for Brazil, crowning them world champions for the first time in history and making them the first and only South American nation to win a World Cup tournament hosted in Europe. Chapter 7. The Tactical Paradigm Shift. The 4-2-4 unraveled. The 5-2 victory in the 1958 World Cup final was much more than a single tournament triumph. It was a watershed moment in the tactical evolution of football. Brazil's 4-2-4 formation fundamentally dismantled the rigid WM systems that had dominated Europe for decades. By understanding the intricacies of the Brazilian tactical framework, the broader impact of this shift on the global game becomes clear. The Brazilian 4-2-4 was a complex tactical system that required a high degree of positional discipline, technical proficiency, and spatial awareness. Its success was built on several key innovations that permanently changed how football was played. 1. The redefinition of the fullback role. Prior to 1958, fullbacks were primarily defensive players, tasked with marking the opposition's wingers and remaining deep. The Brazilian 4-2-4 revolutionized this role. By utilizing a four-man defensive line, the central defenders provided the necessary cover, allowing the fullbacks to push forward into the attack. Players like Jaume Santos and Nilton Santos pioneered the concept of the overlapping fullback, providing width in the attacking third and creating numerical overloads on the flanks. This innovation laid the groundwork for modern attacking fullbacks and wingbacks. The midfield axis of control, the 4-2-4 formation, featured only two central midfielders, a setup that initially appeared defensively vulnerable. However, the success of the system relied on the exceptional tactical intelligence and passing ability of midfielders like Didi and Zito. Didi, often referred to as folha seca, dry leaf, for his free kick technique, served as the deep-line playmaker and the brain of the team. He dictated the tempo of the match, retained possession, and distributed the ball to the flanks. Zito provided the necessary defensive balance, breaking up opposition attacks and covering for the advancing fullbacks. This two-man midfield structure required a high level of systematic coordination and tactical understanding. The evolution of the number 10, perhaps the most significant tactical legacy of Pele's 1958 performance, was the evolution of the number 10 role. Traditional center forwards operated on the defensive line, relying on physical strength to score goals. Pele introduced the concept of the withdrawn forward or second striker. He dropped deep into the midfield, drew central defenders out of position, and created space for his teammates. By serving as both a playmaker and a goal-scoring threat, Pele demonstrated that a forward's value extended far beyond traditional goal scoring. He became the key figure in breaking down rigid, man-to-man marking systems. Fluidity over rigidity. European football in the 1950s was characterized by structural rigidity. Players were expected to adhere strictly to their designated positions and marking assignments within the WM formation. The Brazilian 4-2-4 introduced a new level of fluidity. While the formation provided a clear structural framework, The movement of the forward line was dynamic and interchangeable. Wingers cut inside, midfielders made late runs into the box, and forwards dropped deep. This fluidity made the Brazilian attack unpredictable and difficult for European defenders to track, paving the way for the fluid tactical systems seen in modern football. The success of the 4-2-4 formation proved that systematic innovation could elevate natural creative flair to new heights. The Brazilian triumph demonstrated that football was not merely a contest of physical strength and rigid structures, but a sophisticated global chess match where spatial manipulation, tactical intellect, and fluid movement were paramount. Chapter 8. The cultural and societal impact of Jogo Bonito. The impact of Brazil's 1958 World Cup victory extended far beyond the confines of the football pitch. The success of the national team catalyzed a profound cultural shift within Brazil and significantly influenced how the country was perceived on the international stage. For decades leading up to 1958, Brazilian society experienced an internal debate regarding its own national identity. The cultural legacy of colonialism and historical struggles had fostered a sense of inferiority, often reinforced by European perceptions of Brazil as a developing, chaotic, and disorganized nation. This psychological shadow was deepened by the devastating loss in the 1950 World Cup final. The 1958 victory in Sweden dramatically altered this narrative. The Brazilian national team showcased a distinct, dynamic style of play that became known as Jogo Bonito, the beautiful game. This style was characterized by rhythmic movement, creative dribbling, and joyful expression, deeply rooted in Afro-Brazilian cultural traditions such as samba and capoeira. By defeating European teams on their own turf and using a highly sophisticated tactical framework, Brazil proved that their cultural approach to the sport was not a sign of disorganization, but a unique and formidable strength. The success of the 1958 squad was also a major milestone for social integration and racial equality in sport. The Brazilian team of 1958 was one of the first openly multiracial squads to achieve global prominence. Black and mixed-race players, including Pele, Garrincha, Didi, and Jaume Santos, were instrumental to the team's success. Their prominence on the world stage challenged prevailing racial prejudices and became a symbol of national unity and pride within Brazil. The achievements of these players demonstrated that excellence and athletic superiority transcended racial barriers. Furthermore, the style of play exhibited by Pele and his teammates captured the global imagination. The world witnessed a joyful, expressive form of football that contrasted with the mechanical, systematic approach of European teams. This cultural celebration of the sport elevated the Brazilian national team to legendary status, turning the players into global ambassadors for the nation. The victory fostered a sense of confidence and optimism within Brazilian society, contributing to a period of modernization and cultural assertion. The cultural impact of Jogo Bonito remains a defining characteristic of the global sport. It established Brazil as a spiritual home of football and popularized the idea that the game should be played with creativity, joy, and artistic expression. The 1958 triumph proved that systematic tactical innovation did not have to suppress individual creativity, but could instead provide the perfect platform for it to shine on the world stage. Chapter 9. The Legacy of 1958. A foundation for the future. The 1958 World Cup victory in Sweden was not an isolated triumph. It was the foundation for a prolonged period of Brazilian dominance in international football. The tactical innovations and cultural shifts established in 1958 set the stage for the evolution of the sport in the decades that followed. The success of the 4-2-4 formation proved that tactical science could elevate natural creative flair to new heights. The Brazilian triumph demonstrated that football was not merely a contest of physical strength and rigid structures, but a sophisticated global chess match where spatial manipulation, tactical intellect, and fluid movement were paramount. The lessons learned and the methods employed in 1958 paved the way for subsequent World Cup victories. The emphasis on scientific preparation, physical conditioning, and psychological evaluation became standard practice for the Brazilian national team. Coach Vicente Fiola's integration of a multidisciplinary backroom staff established a new standard for international team management. Furthermore, the tactical blueprint developed in 1958 continued to evolve. The 4-2-4 formation laid the groundwork for the 4-3-3 system that Brazil deployed in the 1962 World Cup in Chile. In 1962, realizing they needed to adapt to the changing tactical landscape and compensate for the absence of the injured Pele, the Brazilian coaching staff modified the 4-2-4 system. They dropped one of the forwards into the midfield, creating a 4-3-3 shape that provided greater control in the center of the pitch while retaining the attacking threat of the forward line. This adaptability highlighted the tactical sophistication that began in 1958. The pinnacle of this tactical and cultural evolution was reached at the 1970 World Cup in Mexico. The 1970 Brazilian team, widely considered one of the greatest sides in the history of football, featured many veterans of the 1958 triumph, including Pele and Mario Zagallo, who served as the manager. The 1970 team played a fluid, dynamic 4-2-4 formation that was the ultimate expression of Jogo Bonito. The system allowed creative geniuses like Pele, Jairzinho, Rivellino, and Gerson to express themselves freely within a highly organized tactical structure. Pele's performance in 1958 also redefined the expectations for young athletes across all sports. His success as a 17-year-old on the world stage proved that youth, combined with exceptional talent and tactical intelligence, could challenge established veterans. This realization paved the way for the systematic scouting and development of young talent in modern football. The tactical legacy of 1958 also reverberated across the Atlantic. European clubs and national teams studied the Brazilian approach. The overlapping runs of the overlapping fullbacks, the fluidity of the forward line, and the importance of a dynamic playmaker became incorporated into European tactical systems. The concepts pioneered by Brazil in 1958 contributed significantly to the shift from static, rigid formations to the more dynamic, positionally flexible systems that characterize modern football. The story of a 1958 World Cup is, therefore, a narrative of transformation. It tells how a nation confronted its psychological demons and tactical limitations, embraced scientific innovation and preparation, and unleashed the raw genius of a 17-year-old prodigy. In doing so, Brazil permanently changed the nature of the sport, elevating it from a simple physical contest into a complex, beautiful, and global game of tactical intellect. Chapter 10. Conclusion. The beautiful chess match that the 1958 World Cup in Sweden stands as a monumental turning point in the history of global sport. It was the tournament where raw genius collided with rigid geometry, and where a 17-year-old Pele emerged to dismantle the defensive systems of European football. Throughout this analysis, we have traced how Brazil's revolutionary 4-2-4 formation replaced chaotic individualism with scientific precision. This tactical shift redefined the physical, spatial, and mental demands of football, demonstrating that systematic innovation combined with teenage brilliance could permanently transform the sport. We explored the psychological burden that Brazil carried prior to 1958, stemming from the heartbreak of Americanazzo. We examined the structural identity crisis in global football, contrasting the rigid WM formation used by European giants with the improvisational, unstructured style of South American play. This challenging backdrop set the stage for a desperate Brazil to seek a radical departure from tradition to survive the physical and tactical demands of the 1958 tournament. The birth of the 4-2-4 formation and the unprecedented inclusion of a multidisciplinary backroom staff, including psychologists and dentists, represented a scientific approach to elite performance. This shift from pure instinct to structured tactical geometry provided the foundation for a new style of play. The arrival of Pele in the starting lineup mid-tournament served as the ultimate catalyst. His specific movement patterns, characterized by intelligent dropping into the midfield, exploited the spaces created by the new tactical system. The synergy between Garrincha's width and Pele's central gravity effectively broke the man-to-man marking systems of the era. Ultimately, the 1958 Brazilian squad proved that tactical science and natural